Welcome to the VOPCast, brought to you by Banfico. In this series, we explore the key challenges and opportunities in staying compliant with the upcoming instant payment regulation, with a special focus on verification of payee and how banks can go beyond compliance to proactively reduce fraud, protect their customers, and build trust.
Hello everyone, my name is Albert. I'm leading the business development activities at Banfico. I've been with the company for more than 5 years now, and over the last 3 years focusing on the account verification service. So in the UK, confirmation of payee, in the EU, verification of payee, and more globally. And together we have Kjeld.
Hi, so my name is Kjeld Herreman. I'm one of the founding partners of Paylume. We are a Brussels-based consulting firm specialized in payments and fraud prevention, where we've had the opportunity to address the topics around VOP for both market infrastructures, payment service providers, payment service users, everyone. So happy to share some of the insights we've gotten. Thank you very much, Albert, for the invitation to join this call.
Thank you for joining us. So as we know, look, VOP is part of instant payment regulation. The deadline is coming faster than anyone is expected. Well, 9 weeks left only. And the topic that I wanted to kind of highlight is the PSU channel integration. I feel like sometimes PSPs and banks forget about it. Because if, at least from my perspective, the way I see it, when you look at VOP, a lot of the aspects can be covered or addressed by the RVMs, the technical service providers. So from the connectivity to the name matching, and based on our conversations with PSPs and banks, we sometimes see that they don't realize how much work is actually on their end regarding the PSU channels, because they have to update it themselves, and then they start thinking if they have enough resources and they need to start planning. And considering that what regulation is in 2 months, I think it's important to highlight that. Maybe we can look into more details, and Kjeld, maybe you can cover the channels that are actually covered by the VOP.
Absolutely. So thank you, Albert, for that summary. I think that's correct, right? A lot of banks or other payment service providers, they say, hey, we've selected a routing and verification mechanism. We've got this project under control. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of actions that banks need to take on their side in order to be compliant with the instant payments regulation. Before we dive into the payment channels, I just want to summarize, I think, the 3 areas where banks really have to make an effort to make sure that they're truly ready for verification of payee, and not just from a compliance standpoint, but from a user experience standpoint. The first area is their data. They hold the KYC data about their clients, about their payment service users. Of course, they provide that potentially to a routing and verification mechanism to do the matching for them, but the RVM can only match based on the data that is provided to them. And that data sometimes can be outdated. It may only have legal names, not commercial names, things like that. So banks really need to stop and think about the data quality they have, and to make sure that they get it up to the right level in coordination with their clients. And that would be the second area. It's communicating with clients, both on user side as well as user of the verification of payee service, but also as receiver. What have we seen is that, well, receivers sometimes, they don't necessarily understand that verification of payee is coming. And they don't necessarily always have the right data on their invoices, for example. In the Belgian market, the verification of payee service launched a little bit earlier than in the rest of the Europe with most of the banks. And there actually, we had a splash in the media where I believe it was the tax authority, the VAT tax authority, they had different name on their invoices than their legal name. So they were getting no matches originally for this tax authority. So that caused a lot of customer complaints and things like that. So that's the second area, right? And I think, Albert, the area that you're focusing on rightly is on payment channel side, because obviously we can have a routing and verification mechanism that can route requests for us, that can respond on our behalf, but that RVM isn't going to develop user interfaces for us. There are some RVMs that have user interfaces, dashboards that can be used by corporates, potentially even with white labeling and things like that, but that's only one channel. If we think about the integration of this service into a mobile banking app, into online banking, that's work that has to be done by the banks. And that's only 2 different channels. If we really start to think about how many channels each bank has, typically we're looking at 10 to 100 different channels depending on the scope of the bank. You've got the mobile banking app, you've got online banking, maybe dependent on the client type, you'll have different segments. But you'll also potentially have a call center where you can initiate transactions. You will have your agencies where clients can do transactions, maybe ATMs, faxes, potentially email, back offices, you name it. There's so many different channels that have to be adapted. I think a lot of banks haven't quite gotten to the stage to fully grasp how many channels they have. I assume actually that the majority of banks won't be fully compliant with the regulation by October. What have you seen there, Albert?
So I agree. But speaking with some banks, I know that some are even looking at delaying the bulk as much as possible, asking for their corporates to opt out. But then you have to remember that corporates can opt in and opt out at any time, and you can't force them to opt out. But just looking at the customer channels itself, I feel like it's super important to ensure that the experience, whichever channel they're using, it's the same within the bank. So they see, because I know in the UK market, for example, there's a very strict customer experience guidelines. I heard that one of the reasons was that initially there was one bank that was testing out confirmation of payee, and they decided to use their branding colors as the response colors, and people didn't really understand what that means. And after that, the strict customer experience guidelines started. And the way I see verification of payee in general is that building trust between the payer and the payee. And if I'm a end user and I'm banking with different banks, and I go to different banks and I'm getting a different customer experience, I will start getting confused. And like us as a Banfico, we're actually running a VOP working group as a market participants. And one of our first objective was to create a customer experience guidelines. It's just to trying to bring the standardization into the market. Of course, we can't push it as you must use it, but some kind of a guideline. So me as an end user, whichever bank I'm using, I'm getting the same experience. What are your thoughts? Should EPC get involved in this, or should it be just left for the market to sort it out themselves? What are your thoughts on this?
So I think a little bit of both, right? First of all, if we're thinking about Europe, there's so many different languages that are involved. So you need to have a lot of different languages. And I do believe there are some efforts for standardizing the language that's in place. I think there's also a difference in the way that banks communicate with their clients, and there should be definitely room for nuance there. You don't have this phenomenon in English, but for example, in French, you have tu and vous, which is the more informal you or the more formal you, right? And which one do you go for? How do banks do that across their channels? What's important to keep in mind is that there's also a degree of liability that is associated to the outcome of verification of payee. So clients have to understand, okay, what does it mean if it's a close match? What does it mean if it's a no match, right? So I think when it comes to the specific language that's used there, that should be standardized to the greatest extent possible. And certainly if we're using symbols, then it can be more difficult. So certainly the check or the green box, I think it should be relatively standardized. The other area where standardization can help is in client communication, because there is a sense to communicating to clients about verification of payee. Now that could be done directly through the payment channels. That's one way of doing it. Another way that you could do that is media communication. Where there can be differences is regional differences. For example, our experience in Belgium, there we introduced a trilingual verification of pay solution, right? Where the response and even the name suggestion can be provided in multiple languages. So there definitely has to be room for nuance. So language standardized, customer experience, that's where I think we can start to see more differences. And certainly on corporate side, right? Because, I mean, if you're talking about unitary verification of payee, it's relatively standardized. On corporate side, there's definitely a lot more room for adaptation. How can a corporate configure their verification of payee? Is it just file and you only get the results, or Can payments get on hold? Can you split up that file so the payments that are processed get processed and other ones rejected? Different corporates will want different behaviors. And I think they'll want to try to change that configuration as well as their data quality improves. And I think that's an area where banks can really leverage their competitive advantage and bring to market a better customer experience than others, right?
Speaking about the corporates, every single bank that we're speaking with, they seem to be the biggest challenge for them is the bulk payments. So why do you think the banks are finding corporate channels and the bulk checks such a big challenge?
First of all, the way that verification is set up and the language in the instant payments regulation. The language says you are supposed to do verification of payee between the time that you receive the data, but before the transaction is authorized. Now, that works perfectly for client channels that are mobile banking apps. However, if we think about most corporates, well, that process is inverted.
Yeah.
The corporate authorizes the transaction within their own systems, within their accounts payable systems, their ERP systems, their treasury management systems. And then they send the payment file over to their bank. They send that over a secure corporate channel. I'm being very careful choosing my language here, secure corporate channel, which is also the language that we'll find in the regulatory technical standards of the EBA associated to strong customer authentication. And those secure corporate channels are exempt. I think that's Article 14 of the regulatory technical standards. They're exempt from strong customer authentication. So here you've got authorization before the bank receives the data. So how do you do something in that time between the two things that are processed? The other thing is, well, now you've got this payment file and everything is authorized. Well, what do you do with that file? Because it can contain, let's say, 100 transactions. Let's say 2 of them are no matches. Do you put the 98 other transactions on hold? Or do you process the 98 other ones and then reject the 2? Or do you put the whole file on hold, or do you reject the whole file? Right? Think about a company that's doing payroll.
Yeah.
They're paying 10,000 people, and one of their employees decided to change their name for some reason, and now it's a no match. Does that entire payroll get put on hold? So it becomes very challenging to really get that balance between creating friction for corporates in their straight-through processing capabilities, but at the same time protecting corporates from fraud. The final challenge associated to that, I would say, is, well, when corporates are going to introduce data, right? Because corporates typically do not enter data when they are doing a payment. They create suppliers in their ERP systems. They create employees in their HR systems. And that's the time when it's sensible for them to do a verification of payee check. But again, the instant payments regulation and the EPC rulebook don't even allow for that because it has to be linked to a payment. Now, what I'm anticipating is that, well, there's no reason that you couldn't do a payment of 1 cent towards an employee. Right? If we think about SDD mandates, that's often how it was done as well. So there's a way to get around it. But I think, the verification of payee service for corporates as it is today isn't necessarily the perfect solution for corporates. And it's something that you see more often with European regulation, is that it's written by retail clients for retail clients that don't necessarily have that full and deep understanding of corporate processes.
Okay, thank you for sharing the insights. Always interesting to chat with you. Hopefully the listeners will find out something new as well. And over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Albert. It's a pleasure having talked to you about this interesting topic, and we will continue to observe and to guide the industry in this.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for watching this episode of the VOPCast. For more information or to schedule a demo, contact our experts at VOP@banfico.com. Don't miss the next episode. We'll be back with more insights to help you meet the October deadline.